courage.
I got thinking, what is it like to die? Is it going to happen to me?
Sacrifice.
I love this country.
All for liberty.
I'm proud to be a part of that history.
We salute the Tampa Bay veterans who were there, both then and now, 80 years later. From the hallowed shores of Normandy, France, here now is Fox 13's Mark Wilson.
Hello and welcome to Normandy, on the shores of the English Channel, where right over my shoulder, close to 10,000 American soldiers are now buried. We're here this week to honor those who changed the course of history that day and honor all those veterans who played such a pivotal role, including many of those from the Tampa Bay area who are here this week with the Florida Elks Association. We've also caught up with a handful of Bay Area musicians here in France, providing much of the emotional soundtrack here. But first, I want you to meet a 100-year-old man from Bradenton. Among the very few who are still alive who played a role here on D-Day, he landed on these very shores here behind me, amongst that first wave. And he not only has a story to tell about that day, he also has a story or two about a certain woman he happened to meet a few months into the war, a woman who would change his life.
Reflection brings emotion. On these, the very sands where Cosmo Utero nearly died 80 years ago. Flashbacks to a wide-eyed teen who missed out on his high school graduation, dropping out of school to fight for his country. Barely a year later, he found himself on the beaches of Normandy, France, in the middle of one of the bloodiest battles in the history of the world, fighting for his life.
What do you remember about landing on that beach?
It was the first time I'd seen dead people floating around before I even landed.
An infantry soldier in the 29th Division, 175th Regiment, his Higgins landing craft stopped just short of the beach, plunging him into water deeper than he expected. He ditched everything on him, including his weapon, just to keep from drowning.
I got thinking, what is it like to die? Is it going to happen to me?
Then came the hail of gunfire. His bad day had just gotten worse.
First thing I thought of was to pick up a rifle, because that's something you're going to need.
And what would happen next is something no soldier would ever forget. Sadly, there were plenty of rifles to be found on the beach.
The fellow had fallen, so he didn't need it, so I picked it up and headed for shore.
Once he and his comrades took the beach, securing northern France in the following weeks, it changed the course of the war, putting Germany on its heels, surrendering less than a year later.
I don't think that the youth of today realize what we did. I speak to some of them, they don't even know what the war was all about.
That's got to be a little frustrating, huh?
Well, a little bit, yeah.
Cosmo's next order was the one that changed his life. Sweeping German houses for soldiers and arms when he met Erica, a German woman who'd captured his heart.
I just saw a nice-looking girl there, and so I inspected that house more than once.
Proud of his soon-to-be bride, Cosmo showed this off to the German prisoners he'd been guarding, when one of them asked to borrow it. Days later, that prisoner presented Cosmo with this, a colored pencil sketch, a gift for sneaking them some food. It's now one of his prized possessions. Cosmo and Erica were married more than 50 years before she passed away, but not before giving him 8 children and 10 grandchildren.
So as awful as it was, the war in at least one way was good to you.
Yeah, was.
But one last target remained. That high school diploma he missed out on? Cosmo earned it, finally in 2021, 78 years later.
That's a good picture.
These days, Cosmo spends his afternoons greeting neighbors in Bradenton and swapping stories. And no one on the street has any quite like his.
I hope they history will see we did a good job.
I think it will.
Yeah.
Cosmo Utero is also a knight. He was knighted by France back in 2016, given the Legion of Honor, France's highest civilian honor. Now, also amongst those from the Tampa Bay area who made this trip here and played a critical role on D-Day and beyond is a 97-year-old paratrooper from Pasco County who not only wears his patriotism on his sleeve, but he would answer that call again in a heartbeat if it came tomorrow.
Before he agreed to sit down for our interview, Hector Hita had one condition. He insisted he wear his World War II uniform, and you're about to find out why. Born in Puerto Rico, he vacationed with his grandfather in New York the summer of 1944. Hector was 17. His granddad took him to the movies, and back then, movie theaters gave updates on the war before the featured attractions.
This was D-Day.
They showed clips of the D-Day invasion that had just occurred weeks earlier and reported the heavy Allied losses. Hector tells me that's when his patriotic heart awakened.
When I see those young kids over there, the way they were fighting and running, I say, I want to be one of those. That's the reason why I joined the Army.
And what the Army needed most were volunteers to be paratroopers.
I say, well, I raised up the hand. I didn't know what a paratrooper was. I just came from Puerto Rico. I could hardly speak English.
Before he knew it, he was leaping out of C-47s in the Pacific, where the Japanese were waiting for him. Hector made 39 jumps, and one in particular will remain with him forever, as will this knife. A gift his comrade, a good friend, gave him as he lay dying from a Japanese bullet.
So he take the knife and he gave it to me. That's my friend was there with me. He died right in my hand.
And while Hector gets the royal treatment at each and every turn here on these beaches of Normandy, reflecting now on his role and the many others across the globe who changed the course of European history, there's one word he doesn't want to hear.
I am not a hero. The hero is the one that died. They were a hero. They tried to do the best and they get killed.
A prideful life with no regrets from the start, and a deep love of country thicker than the wool that covers his heart.
I'm glad that I went and fight for this country. I love America. I love this country. If I gotta go back again, I'll do it. Believe me.
Still to come from Normandy, D-Day at 80. The St. Pete soldier buried here who may be fallen, but thanks to a Pinellas teacher and student, he was not forgotten.
Half a world away, time has a way of standing still. But for those who are living history, 80 years has passed far too quickly. So the Florida Elks Association has brought 4 veterans from Tampa to Normandy to witness a nation and a world saying thanks. By now, you know Hector Hita, Hollywood Hector as they now call him. Also along, 98-year-old U.S. Army veteran Malin Grip, 97-year-old Manny Maldonado, U.S. Army paratrooper and glider, and 96-year-old Stearns Poor, U.S. Marine.
I really have led an interesting life, and I've shed a lot of tears, but, you know, like life, you just put one foot in front of the other.
What does that American flag mean to you?
Oh, mean a lot. The flag, it does mean a lot.
It weighs heavily on Malin's heart as well. He saw heavy fighting in the weeks after D-Day and all the way through the Battle of the Bulge, even liberating a German concentration camp.
I'm proud to be a part of that history, and I wish that many, many more that aren't happy with it look back and say it was one of the greatest things the world had seen.
But sadly, that's the last we heard from Malin. Malin made it to Normandy with his daughter and 2 sons, but the moment he arrived, he didn't feel well. They flew him home, and he passed away on Saturday. So with heavy hearts, Manny, Hector, and Stearns strolled on. Graveside, beachside, even jeepside, greeted by a lieutenant general. Respect and admiration at each and every turn. And with them, many believe we're losing something else.
It's a lost world of respect and duty and a sense of belonging to something greater than yourself.
Now this is where it gets a little personal for me, especially right here, because of one particular soldier, a 25-year-old with a familiar last name, who was among the very first to land here on Omaha Beach on D-Day. A young soldier who is credited with saving dozens of lives simply by disobeying an order.
With Europe hanging in the balance, the largest sea, air, and land assault in the history of the world was underway in Normandy, on the northern beaches of France, June 6, 1944. Among the very first to make landfall was 25-year-old Tech Sergeant Quentin Wilson, leading the 116th Infantry Division into pure hell.
They went through extremely heavy gunfire, more heavy gunfire, and an incredibly heavy ocean out there. They got sick before they even got there. They were throwing up in the ship.
His nephew, my father John, was one of the few he ever spoke with about D-Day, perhaps only because Dad went to Normandy on the 50th anniversary in 1994 with Bay Area vets from the 101st.
It takes your breath away when you're reminded of how many died there.
There likely would have been dozens more had Sergeant Wilson not called a battlefield audible. Quentin and his older brother Paul Wilson, my grandfather, grew up in the hills of southwestern Virginia, thrust into war with Hitler on the verge of taking all of Europe. Paul was assigned to the USS Missouri, but spared conflict when the Navy assigned him to manage their payroll. Quentin found himself in a tank company, though, in England, preparing for the invasion of all invasions, when General Eisenhower stopped by his battalion to monitor their training. Here he is in his own words, 50 years later, as recorded for the World War II Museum in New Orleans.
He selected a couple of targets out under a couple of bushes and wanted us to see if we could hit them.
He didn't buckle under pressure from Ike, and wouldn't buckle days later, leading his company in an amphibious duckboat onto the shores of a chaotic and bloody Omaha Beach, where the Germans were waiting.
2 grazes of bullets I had was on each cheek. And I smelled the flesh burn on this one over here when it went by.
He'd been ordered, despite the incessant fire, to land in a certain spot on the beach where the others before him had all been obliterated.
And you just saw heads and limbs and arms and pieces of boat flying in the air.
So he veered left, about 30 yards, defying direct orders.
And I got all of my company in there without getting wounded.
His was the first boat in his company to reach the beach.
Had he not done that, they'd been dead. He told me later, he said, I could have been prosecuted for what I did because I wasn't going to land where everybody was getting killed. But as soon as they hit the beach, man, that's when things even got worse. Gunfire even ricocheted off the barrel of that big howitzer and hit him. Hit him in the face, hit him in the chest, and knocked him. He was knocked out.
His Army medical record shows shrapnel removed from 7 places, including his eye and his now broken leg. Later, he only reluctantly showed off his Purple Heart, prouder instead that wasn't what brought him home.
And believe it or not, within a couple of weeks, he was back out there, helping to lead the force across France and into Germany.
Because he wanted to go back out, didn't he?
He wanted to go back out.
And though memories now begin to fade,
when I see the picture of my dad and his brother side by side,
the pride only grows for each and every one of those who so bravely battled.
They made an incredible commitment to serve this country, to serve democracy and the freedom for these countries that we were trying to save from very bad people.
Uncle Quentin lived a good life, raised a family in Tennessee before he passed away in 2011. And one of his prized possessions was always a letter from another soldier in his company, thanking him for saving their lives. Still ahead from Normandy, their crowning moment, a celebration for the ages.
Many of our cadets are hoping to be in the military in the future, and I can't think of a better opportunity for them to see the amount of sacrifice that may be required of them.
It's heavy. We were at Omaha Beach, and it was kind of scary to think about that.
You can't help but have a tinge of gratitude and humility, for everything that these men did for us so that we could be free today.
This trip has given me an experience that I wouldn't necessarily get inside history class, not only musically, but to learn about the military and all the things that we went through in World War II. It's really eye-opening.
It definitely has taken my breath away. To see the patriotism, it blows my mind.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. You're the best. You guys are
9,386. That's how many American soldiers are buried here. Among them, a 19-year-old from St. Petersburg, laid to rest right here. One of the many silent heroes of World War II, who was fallen, but not forgotten.
Plot G, row 15, grave 37. Here lies Private Leo Chalcraft, 4,000 miles away from home.
Somehow, Leo, I hope that everyone remembers you.
The youngest of 3 boys from St. Petersburg, his family couldn't afford to bury him in the States, so his sacrifice ended here. He never had a eulogy. He never even had a visitor. Until Deborah Pettengill and Connor Ross made the trip, more than 70 years later.
It's still very emotional.
Just a few months past his 18th birthday, Leo, with that wry smile, was drafted 2 months before D-Day. The day the U.S. joined the Allied fight against Hitler's forces. Leo and close to 2,000 other U.S. soldiers were on a Belgian ship a few months later, the SS Leopoldville, heading to Normandy to fight in the Battle of the Bulge, until a German U-boat torpedoed their ship just 5 miles off this coast, where the dead are now memorialized.
And so he was a wonderful example of just that regular soldier who was there doing their duty and doing what they needed to for their country.
A Largo High history teacher at the time, Pettengill, and one of her students, Connor Ross, felt that Chalcraft would be the perfect subject of a National History Day contest, and they won a trip to France in 2016 to give this silent hero what he deserved. But survivor accounts of the sinking opened a dark door into his past. As they learned, most soldiers survived the initial torpedo blast, but they were not trained to use their life jackets or the lifeboats, so Leo and many of the others died unnecessarily. military kept those accounts top secret for years for fear of hurting morale, leaving those like Leo, whose family could never afford to visit his grave, fallen and forgotten. So what Deborah and Connor wrote and read at his grave may have been decades overdue, but were deserving words for a young man whose service and memory are silent no more.
That's an emotional experience, I think, to stand on someone's grave that you know his story maybe the best out of anyone alive in this moment, and be able to do that justice. It was really special.
He wasn't a fighter pilot, a paratrooper, or any of those people that are glorified in the movies. He was what most soldiers in World War II were. Men who were too young to know yet what they were going to do with their lives, but still traveled thousands of miles away from home to fight for this country. That's who most of the men were. And without these men like you, Leo, we would never have won the war.
We're here now in the town of St. Mary Glace. Famous, of course, for the memorial that still exists for the American soldier whose parachute was caught on top of the church steeple when he parachuted down into this country on June 6, 1944. Today, it was a parade for the ages, one fit for the heroes who liberated this country.
You guys appreciate and thank them for what they did?
Yeah. It's unforgettable. Incredible.
I have to explain. No, that's, I can't say no.
Thinking about the guys I brought before that aren't with us. So that's one thing that's really, I just thinking of their faces, their stories.
I'm just happy to do my part, but I am touched by the emotion to a person about our being here.
What were you thinking when you saw so many people saying thank you?
I thank all these people that came in to see the parade. That means a lot to me. That means they appreciate what we did for them.
Well, that's all from D-Day at 80, as we salute those who gave all for our country and this one. From St. Mary Glace, France, I'm Mark Wilson, Fox 13 News.